Good evening and welcome to this evening's feature presentation. My name is Nicole Adams and I'm the local history and genealogy librarian for the Oshawa Public Libraries. I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. The land we are standing on today is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We acknowledge that Oshawa is covered under the Williams Treaties, and as a settler on these lands, we are all treaty people. May we respectfully honor the knowledge and understanding of Indigenous stewards of these ancestral lands and ensure that the voices of the First Peoples are represented in our collections, programs, and services. So I'm going to get started with the explaining what the session's about. If those of you that haven't seen the first part, back last January or February, I believe, I presented on a certain topic of just Oshawa history in general. And someone had said, you should do a then and now session. I think it was John, actually, one of our attendees this evening. And so I did one last spring, I believe, and posted it to YouTube, and it's had couple thousand views, which was kind of interesting from a library point of view. We don't tend to get that many people viewing them. And I thought, well, there's so many images of Oshawa out there that I should do a part 2. And there'll likely be a part 3 and 4, because maybe once a year I'll kind of cover this. It's kind of hard to cover every area of the city. And I tend to just pick and choose interesting shots. There isn't really a theme, just I tend to follow around maybe certain areas and say, well, this is what it looked like then. And then across the street was this thing and that thing. So you'll see that I kind of jump around the city a little bit. So the image we have here is one that most people familiar with Oshawa will have seen before. It's a colorized postcard. So it was a photograph and then they colorized it for a postcard, which I think is really nice. I think for a while I had it as my desktop on my own computer, and I really like this image. It's looking north on Simcoe Street from the Four Corners. So the street going across the bottom of the picture is King Street, and we're looking north from there. Now this was about 1910, this picture would have been taken. You can see a horse and buggy over on the turning left, it looks like here, just kind of, actually, maybe he's parked there on the northwest corner of Simcoe and King. He's just kind of sitting there, and there's other people walking around. You can see it's kind of an action shot. And the people on the other side of the street, they're standing in front of what's called the Western Bank. Over here, and further up the street, there's the Queen's Hotel, which you can see the little tower here. This is the Queen's Hotel on Bond Street, which goes across the bottom here. You can see a streetcar in the distance there heading up Simcoe Street, because there were tracks that went all the way up Simcoe Street here. Also, you will see buildings on the west side of Simcoe Street are evident in the photo to the north, such as the Clock Tower, which was the town hall up the clock tower up here, further up the street. Now, the streetcar you can see is at the Bond intersection there from Oshawa Railway. Now I'll show you what the shot looks like today, roughly, from a Google Street View. So you can see that everything has changed. There are a few buildings on the west side of Simcoe that are original, or at least date from that time period of the turn of the century. From the shot from before, none of those buildings on the corners are here on either side of the street, are not there anymore. The Queen's Hotel isn't there anymore. The town hall is not there anymore. The only thing that remains, I believe, are 2 of these buildings on the left side. In the modern photo, if you can see them here, just behind the stoplight there, those photos there, those buildings there. Everything else is sort of modern and very 70s looking. The TD Bank went in, I believe, in the 70s, and its counterpart across the street went in, I believe it was the early 80s. And then the tower up, which used to be a Bank of Nova Scotia, is now part of the UOIT campus, the Department of Education. Staying in the downtown core, here we have King Street West looking east. So we're standing kind of in front of where the Michael Starr building is, and we're looking towards Simcoe Street. this is kind of a very busy picture. It's the view of roughly where Prince Street is, actually, where the person on the bicycle is at the bottom left. He's kind of at where the intersection of Prince Street, where the coffee culture is on the corner there now. He's sitting there at that corner, and the streetcar you can see going down the middle, sorry, the tracks of the train going down the middle of the street. And in the banner across the top, stretched across the street, in the distance, it says Gathering of the Clans. This is a picture from the RMG Robert McLaughlin Gallery Boakley collection. And quite a few of the images that I'm using here are from their collection, and the others are from our own library collection. If you have any questions about any of the pictures, you can reach out to me, email or library phone number, give me a call. And if you have any questions about this or any other photographs, I'll be reviewing how you can reach me later on in the presentation. Now, on the south side of the King Street, you can see Bailey's Hardware and in the front of the picture here. And most of the buildings on the right are still there, but the ones on the left are gone. They're not there anymore, and they're replaced with newer buildings. So look at that's the before shot, and then the now shot is roughly this. I wanted to show you that the buildings on the south side of the street are still there. Bailey's Hardware, what we saw in the previous photograph here, is actually the same as the building here on the corner, which is was for years called the Grand Central Emporium. Now it's a convenience store. And the buildings right beside it, to the left there, are all there up to, in the previous photograph, all these are there. And then the one on the corner has been ripped down and used to be Burns Shoes building. And now it is the CIBC building, which was built in the early 80s. So that's kind of a view going on King there. Staying on King Street, I wanted to show you again Bailey's Hardware from the other side. This is during Old Home Week in 1924. View of a parade going down King Street. Again, we're looking kind of back the other way, sort of, at the Bailey's Hardware building. You see people poking their heads out the window to look at the parade going by. And to the right, we see the Lancaster Hotel. At this time in the 20s, it was called the Commercial Hotel. That has since been torn down. It was torn down in the 70s and was taken over by the large Michael Starr building in the background. So you can see here the building, which is called Grand Central, that business there. The building is much the same. The top of it is a little bit different. The facade on the front is a bit taller, I think, in this photograph, but you can see that that building hasn't changed much in the last 100 years. But Michael Starr was built in 1983. So that has taken up, and a lot of things were torn down on that lot. There was a couple of buildings there that had taken up from since then. Now, just around the corner, this is Simcoe Street looking north. This is 1911. This is from the Robert McLaughlin Gallery's collection. They are repaving Simcoe Street. And buildings on the west side of Simcoe Street in the background of this photograph all along here. So with a high resolution picture from the gallery, you can zoom in and see some of the business names. But the main one was the Burns Shoe Store, which is on the corner of this is Simcoe going up the street. And across the middle of the photograph would be King Street and Burns Shoes on the corner here. Much like the picture we started out, the first slide, we can see up Simcoe and the clock tower of the town hall up the street. But I thought this was a really interesting shot of people at work building up on the street. The paving blocks are visible on the sidewalk in front of the Burns Shoes, these paving blocks kind of in front of the shoe store here. And Felt Brothers Jewelry Store here. And they actually... they've got the curb and the gutter already in place along the side. You can see they're working on the one side first, and then they're going to be working on the other side later on, spreading the concrete on the road in front of the concrete mixer. Now, if we look at this shot today, This is from the other side. As much we talked about the CIBC building earlier. This is it from its other facade on Simcoe Street. And it sort of took up the spot where Burns Shoes was, plus I think a little bit more. And there's some buildings down the street which are still there. So you show this view is, again, nothing much is the same except for a few buildings up the street, which we saw in a previous photograph. So from this to this, again, much more modern looking, of course. And most cities will have this because Oshawa's downtown core was quite small to begin with. When the newer buildings were coming in, the older ones were torn down. Sometimes it was because of damage or fire, and other times it was for progress and to make more space and more floors. So you see that. Now, this is again a much earlier photograph. This is taken from about 1872. This is the Orange Day Parade. Looking up Simcoe Street. And we've got, see, they say this is from the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, the Boakley collection as well. Now, this is Simcoe from the other side. The tower, the clock tower for the Oshawa Town Hall is not yet built, so you don't really see it up here. Across the street, though, you do see the Queen's Hotel, which is here on the corner. Now, of course, I'll be showing the Queen's in a couple of photographs in a minute, but this is showing it from one side, looking up Simcoe Street and some of the buildings that used to be there. The buildings on the corner across from the hotel are where the Royal Bank used to be and the Oshawa Market is now. And the Queen's Hotel used to sit on this empty lot, which has been a parking lot since I was in high school, since about the early to mid 80s. So that's the view of that from the before and to the after here. And this, in the earlier photograph, you can see white horses and white uniforms of the marchers. Led the researchers of the photograph to conclude that it was the 12th of July Orange Day Parade. Also, there's a picture, a sign out front of one of the buildings, which was a picture gallery, which people could go in and view photograph, much like an art gallery on Simcoe Street there. Now, this is the Queen's Hotel from Bond Street, kind of looking diagonally towards the corner. This is taken about 1918. Cars passing under a decorated arbor outside the Queen's Hotel on the northeast corner of Bond and Simcoe Streets. And the sign reads, "Welcome to our heroes," which the sign across the top there. Now, the Queen's Hotel was established in 1874. So just after that photograph we saw of it up the street, that was taken in 1872 of the Orange Day Parade. It was built around the same year. So this is relatively new. When it was built, the photograph was from 1874, and that's roughly when the hotel was built. And then it was altered in 1921, shortly after this photograph, to be used as apartments with stores beneath. And sadly, it was damaged by fire in the mid 80s, and it was torn down and has been a parking lot ever since, next to the armories here. This spot here. I always felt this is just kind of a shame. Parking is needed, of course, but it's kind of been kind of a lost little space for quite some time, and it just seems a shame. Of course, they couldn't have done anything because the hotel burned, or the building burned, so they couldn't keep it up. But it's just a shame to see nothing else has gone into that spot besides parking. Okay. Now, across the street from the hotel was the Oshawa Carriage Works, or the McLaughlin Carriage Factory. This was the first site of the carriage company after Robert McLaughlin moved it from Enniskillen. He constructed this building in 1873 on a site just south of the town hall, located at about 50 to 54 Simcoe Street North, and across the street from the Armory, and the Queen's Hotel. This building does still stand. It actually has had a couple of different incarnations. After the McLaughlins built a new factory over on William Street, sort of the large factory area that you know of today, or that you knew of, sorry, in the later years, in the up until the buildings were torn down in the 70s and 80s. It was then this building here, the original one, was taken over by Brooks Livery around the turn of the century. So 1899 is when the McLaughlins had moved into their new factory, but then it burned and they had to build a new one again. But in around the turn of the century, Brooks Livery was on this site on Simcoe Street. So this building here, you see them in front of, is the same building that this is. They were standing in front of this facade here, in front of these doors. Now, something else to mention, another photograph from the Robert McLaughlin Gallery is showing this building from the other side. Now it was refaced. This is about in the 1920s. They put new facing on the front, because when you look at the building today, it doesn't look the same on the front. There's different window placements because they literally did a facelift. They pulled the entire front of the building off and refaced it. Now the town hall, you can see here with the tower quite clearly, and horses and buggies down at the bottom. Now the next shot will show you the building as is now, right on the corner there, or just a bit down from the corner. The lot where the town hall used to sit has been empty since it was torn down. And this building here is the same as this one here, but it's been refaced and has apartments above and businesses below. And this is it from just the other side. And you can see the side of the building here. It's quite a large, long building. And that's what you see from the north, if you stand on the north side of the building. That same street, just a bit down, looking up, this is a parade taken in, this was 1898 or thereabouts. So it's obviously a black and white photograph of a parade going down Simcoe Street North. Streetcar tracks are visible. And Bond Street, the elephant here, he's walking towards Bond Street. He's not quite there yet. Now the Queen's Hotel that we saw would be across the street here, but it's not in the shot. So you can see again, this building that was the McLaughlin building became Brooks Livery, and the building is still there. And that's it from the other side, and the town hall again, to kind of orient yourself. And the town hall sat at the corner of Simcoe and Richmond, which went across the top there. This is it today. Now the building I mentioned, which is a store called the Bent Willow, isn't it now? Is still up here at the corner. For years, it was a convenience store called the Hasty Market. And the other buildings beside them have been a bit more modern additions, but you can see here all these businesses along here. In the earlier shot, there are some other buildings here. So this one beside the livery building that we're talking about is there as well. Here behind these trees. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a good shot without the trees. And the other buildings were built a little bit later. The reason why a lot of these photographs are in the downtown core is, of course, the older part of the city. That's where people lived. So the older buildings don't really exist a bit further out. Although this one, the octagonal house, this is from the RMG collection, the Thomas Boakley photograph collection. It was, there was a trend in American social reformer and phrenologist was the innovator of this type of structure. Orson Squires Fowler believed the sphere, the circle, was the most perfect form, but the closest he could come to a sphere in construction was the octagon. And homes of this type were a fad for quite some time. And a carpenter named Thomas Kirkland built this one in Oshawa in about 1870 on the north side of Lloyd Street. He also owned a small sawmill and used sawdust between the outside studding for insulation. And this is said to be one of the first insulated homes in Oshawa. Now, by the 1960s, dry rot, probably because of the sawdust insulation, had commenced. And although a campaign to move it for use by the McLaughlin Art Gallery was started, the move was deemed too expensive and impractical, and the home was demolished in 1968. The grounds are now being used, you guessed it, as a parking lot behind the senior center, located at 34 Lloyd Street, North Side. So the senior center is here at the front. So that's where it's at roughly. Now, moving a little bit east, this is the General Motors, one side of the General Motors plant I mentioned earlier. They had moved from the Simcoe Street over to the William and Mary area. This is showing the buildings on either side of Mary Street, which we're looking down, and William Street going across here at the middle of the photograph, just behind the car there. Now, there's also the connecting overpass that permitted car bodies and materials to travel over the street. They had a couple of these in the factory. One was over Division Street and one was over Mary Street. And the view is looking south from just north of William Street and includes parked automobiles along Mary Street and a car traveling south. There's other stores at the side here. There's a confectionery and a tobacco store. And way down at the bottom of the street, you can see there's a church. It's actually the Calvary Baptist Church, can be detected, which sat at the end of Mary Street for quite some time on the south side of King. So this is all the way down to King. There's this church way down there. And the plant building on the right of the photo was demolished in 1975 and is now the site of McLaughlin Square. And the plant building on the left side was demolished in 1980, and it remained vacant until the YMCA was built in the early 2000s. So that's the shot of it now, roughly. So McLaughlin Square was built in the 1975-76 time period. And the YMCA, this was an empty lot for most of my life. And now they're really building. This is the area of downtown that's really building up. All the buildings that are going in on all those blocks that were empty, those condo towers and things, the courthouse, all of that, the Cliff Mills Motors, all of those businesses sit on the site of what was once the north plant of General Motors, as well as everything on the Costco Plaza there along Division Street and Rinson Road. Now, business downtown, Ward's Dry Goods. This was an institution in Oshawa at the corner of Athol and Simcoe for a number of years. Now, this is taken in about I believe this was in 1940. But it had been at this location since 1920, opened by J.C. Ward and W.A. Dooland. So it was known as Ward and Dooland at the time that it opened, and later became just Ward's. Ward's Dry Goods specifically at this time, and then later Ward's Department Store. It remained at this location until 1976. Now the Legends of Fazio's, a restaurant, is at this location now, and it is the same original building. So it has the same kind of cut off corner there, and you can see the windows and everything have been refaced, but it is much the same footprint as before. Now, Ward's, when it moved from here, it moved around the corner to 33 King Street East, and it was closed in 2015. So it was a business for many, many years, almost actually opened in 1920. So they didn't quite make it to 100 years in Oshawa. This is the Mayor Foux residence, also known as Gladstone Villa. It was the home of Mayor Frederick Luther Foux. He was mayor of the town of Oshawa for 2 terms, first in 1898, then again from 1900 to 1906. And let me see here. Now this house, in this shot, you can't really see it, but there was a little library built on the right-hand side of it, and that still stands today. The house is still there along King Street. It stands between, on its left side, the WB White Insurance, and on the right side, Armstrong Funeral Home. It's kind of set back a little bit from the street, so some people don't notice it's there. And it is, I believe, a law office now. Another business in the downtown core, a building that does still exist, is the Reed's Florist building. 1961 was when this picture was taken, so a little bit more modern. Corner of Simcoe and Bond on the southwest corner. Now, today, it's the longest running florist business in Durham region, although not at this location. It was founded by Richard Reed in 1912, originally at 163 Bloor Street. And then they've had a shop here in the center of town, and it was there for many years. It is now, the building is still there. For many years, it was a Mr. Sub. And now and then more recently it was a cafe. And now I think this is an older photograph. Now it's, I think not sure what it's in there, direct. Not sure it's, I forget what business is at the corner now. I'm not really walking by this area very much, but the building looks much the same, just different advertising out front. Now this is the Peddler People plant. Main building of Peddler People factory. This building sat Simcoe Street South at First Avenue. Those of you who've been in Oshawa for at least a couple of decades will know this as either the Zellers or the Kmart Plaza, which was there later on. This building was torn down in 1980. It had been there since 1920. So it was built in 1920 after Peddler moved from the downtown core where they had their factory to this location on South Simcoe. And like I mentioned, the Kmart Plaza, I still call it the Kmart Plaza, but now they've revitalized this. The Oshawa markets are on this site now, in the site just to the right of this photograph. The Oshawa market, which is the Pickering market, I believe, which has moved to Oshawa, which is a great thing. Now, I mentioned that Peddler People was originally downtown. It was founded in 1861, and then it was located first downtown and then later, shortly after that, located on what is now the site of Memorial Park. It was once the largest supplier of metal products in the Commonwealth. And that was on all their advertisements. So this is actually looking, we're standing on John Street and we're looking into what is now Memorial Park. So this is the Peddler People original factory building and office. And there was a church right to the left side of this as well, which was St. George's Anglican Church, which then was torn down and built further up the street. Now it is, as I mentioned, the site of Oshawa's Memorial Park. So it's very much an open space with the bandshell and the memorial. Now, Peddler's was torn down in 1920, as I mentioned, and then the memorial was built in 1924. So the park land was purchased. There was I believe, a big movement to have a memorial to all the fallen soldiers of World War I by many citizens who raised the funds. And then later on, the city took over the park and made sure it was kept up. The bandshell was funded by, it's called the McLaughlin bandshell because it was funded by funds from R.S. McLaughlin, as many things in this city are. This is the EA level school. So we're looking on Center Street, right next to Memorial Park. It faces Memorial Park. We're looking kind of southwest towards the school. This school does still stand today. Pardon me, sorry, my microphone cut out for a minute. This was taken at the time when the construction of the McLaughlin Library addition was being built. So you see all these men in hard hats. The McLaughlin Library sits right next to the EA level school, which is now the Department of, it's Adult Education Center, but it's still part of Durham District School Board. And there used to be a Legion, which sat roughly where the signage is here. There was the Oshawa Legion's original location was here. It was built in 1933. It was then torn down and they moved to Simcoe Street South, and the building of McLaughlin's library extended. So, and then the school put up, I believe this is an auditorium next to, kind of taking up some of the spot of where the Legion was, and the rest of the library took up the other part of the lot there. So the school is much the same today. I always try to match these up sort of the same dimensions, so you can see that they do, there's been a couple of facelift changes, but it's roughly the same. Now, this was built on the site of what was the Center Street School, or the original site of the Oshawa High School. And this building was built in the 1920s. This is an interesting photograph. This was taken during the spring flood in the Hollow. Now, the Hollow is the area known kind of west of the creek, the Oshawa Creek downtown, where it kind of goes down and then up again, kind of in a hollow down by the creek. So when you're coming across King Street, it has that little bit of a downwards from Park Road towards King Street, towards Center Street. You'll get that kind of bit of a dip there where you go over the bridge. Now, the bridge in this case is just to our left, and the flood of the creek happened here in where did I put the year? 1925. And the Oshawa Canning Company, actually here, we're looking west from the Warren Mill. We're standing where the mill was. So someone stood next to the mill and took a picture looking west, kind of towards the shopping center, if you will, that direction. And the Oshawa Canning Company is in the background at the right. This is the Canning Company here, this building here, and on the north side of King Street. And the W.J. Hare Foundry, which is on the south side of King Street, right at Nassau Street. So Nassau Street is at the corner here, up by these, at the end of this large building on the left, or right in the middle of the photograph. That's Nassau Street there. And none of these buildings are there now. You can see several people are seen out in the street with shovels in hand, trying to move the ice and snow from the spring thaw and flood. So this is roughly where it is now. I couldn't quite stand or get a picture from the area where this was taken, but it's roughly the same. This is what's the area known as the Hollow. So right now you can see there's a car dealerships which sort of reside, the Ontario Motor Sales, which is taken up this spot for many years here where the Canning Company used to be. And the entrance to the Midtown Mall is on the left. And Nassau Street is further up the street and then further up. So you can see when you're driving this area, you can notice how it dips down and then comes back up again. And that's why it's called the Hollow. Before the bridge was put in, of course, it would have been impassable. And then when the bridge came in, of course, land always goes down towards the creeks and then back up from the creeks. So someone said to me one time, you're driving across Oshawa and there's all these hills up and down, up and down. Well, every time you go down a hill, guaranteed there's a creek at the bottom of that hill because that's what made the hills to begin with all those years. So this is an iconic photograph in Oshawa of a train derailment, which happened in 1928. So we're looking at the shunter end of the train here, and it derailed on Bruce Street. And in the foreground of the picture, you see the boxcars from the derailed train here, and the house on the left picture edge here on the very far left is the last house on the north side of Bruce Street and Britson Road. Now there's another house there built now, but that house is still there. As straight ahead, you can see another house with a little peak on the front of the roof. That house is still there as well. And the tracks, you can see how the train tracks, it used to turn. It go from Bruce Street and it would turn north and go up Ritson Road, right by this house, right very close to this house is where it derailed. And this is a picture of roughly where it is now. That house I mentioned is the one here, the brown brick one, and the one beside it is a more recent addition. When they cut the tracks out, and you can see faintly, there's a cut and I'll show you an aerial shot in a moment, but there's a cut here where the tracks used to go. If you're walking along the street or driving, you can see where the tracks used to go, right where that house is. And when they got rid of the tracks, they cleared that lot and built a house there. So this is an aerial shot of what it looks like. coming along Bruce Street, you can clearly see there's a little pattern here turning to the left where the tracks used to go, and they came very close to the house, which is the second one down now on Bruce Street. So that's really, even now, they obviously haven't paved this in quite some time, but you can see because the tracks came up in from the 1960s to the 70s is when the tracks were lifted. I think maybe into the early 80s. I forget exactly, but they haven't been there for quite some time. Now the house as well, here, this little white house on the end is the same house that's here at the end of the track. So that's still there, that house there from the 1920s there. And the aerial shot. I always like to look at the aerial to see like where we're looking at. So Ritson Road here on the north part of the photograph, or sorry, the top of the photograph. Now, this is jumping down to the South Oshawa, Simcoe Street South, Gangemi's, which is Jimmy's service station. This is taken in the 70s, but the house has been there since 1840, thereabouts, and owned by the family for much of that time. I'm not sure about that far back, but they was the family homestead before the service station was opened. And this was taken in the 1970s. This building is still there and looks much the same, but is no longer in operation. It was a service station, plus there was a taxi service. So it was known as the Jimmy Service Station and Crown Taxi, owned by the Gangemi family, who had owned the property for many years. And it sits kind of at the corner of Simcoe Street South and Conant Street. This is it today. Hardly changed at all, actually. But the house kind of looked abandoned for a number of years. I think someone might be living here now, but it had, for many, many years, there was just an old beaten down car sitting in front of the building. And it's kind of a shame because this house is, it's still got some good bones to it. It looks like it could be kind of refinished, and maybe the addition, which was put on by Gangemi's for the service station, it was added onto the front of this much older building. Now, I talked about downtown, but I like to get outside of the downtown core and show some more modern photographs, or at least what things look like in some certain subdivisions. Now, here we've got, there's a question in the chat saying that they lived at 205 Bruce Street and lived there till 1995, and the tracks were still there. Okay, thank you. I knew some of the tracks started to come up downtown in the 60s, but I couldn't quite remember. The trains didn't go down the track anymore, she says. That's good to know. Thank you. Now, this picture here is taken right after the new development was going up, the Cassinger complex apartments, which is at Wilson and Roslyn. So Roslyn Road is kind of cutting across from the left side of the photograph across the top left corner. So that's all Roslyn Road. The new developments, kind of housing developments. You can see the streets being laid out. No trees really planted. You can kind of tell they're newer developments when they look kind of bare. And the Cassingers are these apartment towers, as well as apartment units, townhome units. It was sort of like a very kind of modern for its time, kind of living in a sort of almost like a little gated community of its own. Now, this looks almost identical today. If I flip to the next photograph, this is Cassinger's today. My mother-in-law lived in these buildings for a couple of years, and they were very swanky when they first built, and people were kind of clamoring to live there. They had like pool and park area, and it was just sort of a nice little enclosed community. And it's kind of well kept up as well. And you can see that the trees and the it's kind of built up. So the area we now know is sort of an older area of Oshawa was actually built between the 60s and the 70s, all of these houses in the background. So they looked kind of bare before, and you can actually see the layout of all the streets going in and what it looks like now. Further to the west, we're looking up Simcoe Street and the McDonald's, which is still there. The sign is a bit different. It's much smaller than this one actually now. We're looking at Simcoe Street and Taunton. So this on the corner, this was taken in 1974. So someone going across the front in a bicycle. The house behind the bicycle rider is still there. And the McDonald's is much larger, right? You can see how small the McDonald's building looks here. And it's only a part of it. I think it goes a little bit further to the right there. And then there's a church on the other corner, which isn't quite visible here, which I think is the Northminster Church, if I remember. Now, this is what it looks like. Not all that different, just more lanes, more lights, and they've turned the McDonald's sign slightly. It's not facing the same way. And the little house up here is now a business, I believe, instead of just a house. And the apartment building behind the house was built after 1974 because we can't see it in this picture. And there it is behind. So you can kind of help to date the photographs or date buildings by looking at older photographs and say, well, I know this was taken in 74 and that building wasn't there. Maps can also be very helpful to that. And of course, our city directories, sometimes if I'm looking to see what business was at a certain location, I can say, well, what was in that building before? Look at the city directories for that year and see what might have been at that location. So if you have any questions about some of our resources in the library, I can definitely tell you a little bit about that as well. Oh, St. Stephen's. Thank you very much. That was the church, I guess. Northminster is on the northwest corner of Rosalind and Simcoe. Thank you. Okay. I knew Northminster was on Simcoe. I wasn't sure how far up. And Northminster, of course, when it was built, it was far north. And then, of course, now the north end. So this is St. Stephen's. Thank you so much, St. Stephen. Okay. And this was taken around the same time period by the same photographer, I believe. This is Taunton heading towards Ritson. We're almost at Ritson actually here. This is the going towards Ritson. So we're heading eastbound on Taunton. It's 2 lanes wide, so it's been expanded. Now this area in the 70s, 1974, was part of Oshawa. But before that, before the establishment of the rearrangement of the city and the amalgamation, the annexation of the north part of the city, this was more rural. As you can see, there are houses going in here, but there's lots of open space. And if you head a little bit further east from here, the Taunton and Harmony area was all farmland. Now, I don't have any photographs of that area because nobody was living there. So there's no photographs of that. This is about as close as I can get. So unless someone shares their photographs with me in future. But now what this looks like, this is the corner, as I mentioned, Ritson going north, and we're going along Taunton here. This is kind of on the corner, there's the Harveys here. It's the giant Tiger Plaza where there used to be a gas station on the corner here, as well as across the street, there's the Shoppers Drug Mart and the 5 Points Mall, which no longer exists, off to the right of the photograph, which I'll show you in the next slide. So the same photographer went down the street. Now he's standing on that empty lot looking south towards Ritson Road here. So Taunton going across the middle of the photograph. And you can see that there's, I believe, a Shoppers Drug Mart on the corner behind that car. You see a sign across the middle left there, Shoppers Drug Mart. So this is an intersection known as 5 Points because it used to be that you had Ritson and Taunton making 4 points, and then they had a 5th street that came through, which was the Nonquan Road. And they since cut, when they built the plaza, that area was just known as the 5 Points. And now they don't have, the street doesn't come all the way through anymore. So I've seen a lot of people online saying, why is it called 5 Points? Because there used to be the meeting of 3 streets to make 5 points. Don't know the logic, but that's what it was called. And the buildings on the corner, everything in this is gone now. Originally, when the 5 Points Mall opened on the left side of this photograph in the 1960s, It was open air, which is kind of a strip mall. And they built up. And then eventually, by the time the 80s came around, it was an enclosed mall known as the 5 Points Mall. I think it was around 1985 or 86. I remember my mom used to go shopping at the Zellers Plaza that was in there. And we all, it was kind of like really close. I lived in this area at this time, or 10 years after this photograph. And then later on, of course, now it's been torn down completely. It kind of, as most malls have done these days, they're not smaller malls like this one in the Midtown Mall have kind of died in town because they want big box stores now. So that's what's in this spot now. You'll see there's a storage facility that's taken over. The Target was there for a brief period in the spot where the Zellers was. And then the Target was there for maybe a year or two. And then they now have a giant storage unit here, and there's new little outdoor, they call it the outdoor mall now. So there's like a Dollarama and a gym. And I believe there's a Value Village and some other stores going in here. So it's always been a kind of a shopping area for the North End. And that only continued now for Taunton and Harmony area is kind of taken over, which I think is what kind of finally killed that mall. This is what it looks like now, roughly. So as I was talking with the Burger King on the corner there where the Shoppers Drug Mart used to be, and in behind the building, you can see that's actually where all the storage unit business is there now. And they've ripped down where the metro is still there. I think it's the one part that still lives, that's still there, part of the original mall, and everything else around it was taken down. I worked across the street at the library and saw this coming down on my lunch hour. I'd go out and take a look at them ripping it down. So sometimes there's, improvements need to be made. Businesses weren't as successful in this spot, and they needed to come up with something different for this. It's interesting that it started as an open air mall, and it once again has returned to an open air mall, meaning even the Oshawa Shopping Center, when it started, was just open air mall, like stores, you walk outside to go from store to store. And now that's what the trend is again. The Oshawa Shopping Center, though, remains enclosed. So I'm going to open it up for questions if anybody has any. This is sort of, as I mentioned, very much a work in progress. There's always more and more to review and talk about. We're at the 10-minute mark, I guess, before 7 o'clock. But if anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat or open up your microphone and go ahead and ask any questions you might have about this or anything else about the history of Oshawa. Thank you so much. I just had a comment here. Enjoyed the before and after photos. Most people do. And I find when I share those that people just love to see what used to be in a place. Even looking at from the 70s till now, like I was a kid in the 70s and I remember what something looked like now. Like I go back and say, that didn't used to be there. And I speak to younger people and they're like, what do you mean? That's always been there. So it's nice to show the development of things. Thank you, Eden. Okay, so I wasn't sure. Anyone have any other questions? That's my email address there at the bottom. You can see, oops, looks like it's cut off the A. It's .ca. I don't know why that did that. Go ahead. I heard someone asking a question, I thought. So if you have questions, you can definitely email me. There will be another installment of this sometime in the future, I'm sure. Also, sometimes on our Facebook page or our Instagram or our Twitter, we'll post up different pictures from the library's website on before and after is kind of, I'm starting a trend now to post them maybe once a week, a different picture, different ones, maybe some of these and some not, people who weren't able to attend. But this will be recorded, and you can watch it later or share it around with people if you like. And there's a first installment, and this is the second. So I'll have to edit out some different bits, but it should be up there within the week.
How do you store the pictures, Nicole?
Pardon me, could you repeat that?
How do you store the pictures that you've got?
How do we store them?
How are they curated or whatever?
Right. Well, storing them, a lot of the photographs we have, everything in our collection is through the generosity of donors. So for many decades, people give things to the library. We actually have recently started to put them in archival boxes. And what that means is they're boxes that are non-acidic content of cardboard. And we put them in folders that are also non-acidic, so they won't eat away at the photograph over time. We don't put them in photo albums or little plastic sleeves. Everything is, they're kept in nice, neat little archival boxes on a shelf and kept, they're all numbered and tracked that way. And we've digitized we probably have about 3,500, not quite 4,000 photographs. And I'd say maybe about 2/3 of them have been scanned, I think, and are available through our website. Now I can share that if you like. I can, let me go and unshare my screen for a moment, and I can show you that part if you like. Just a second here.
Are they stored as TIFFs or PNGs?
They're stored as, actually, we save them as both a JPEG file and a TIFF. So when we scan something, we scan it in very high resolution, meaning lots and lots of pixels, so we can get lots and lots of detail. And when we do that, we also save what we call an access copy. So if I need to post something online or use it in my presentation, I don't open up that TIFF file. It's huge. So I open up the access file, which is much smaller, and it's a JPEG. So we keep two of those, and they're kept both on our hard drive, and they're stored in the cloud, and there's backup servers and stuff. It's always important when you have your family photographs. You might have scanned them and you think they're there forever, and your computer dies and you lose them. So it's good to back up things if you can. There's so many options with cloud storage now. Let me just see here. I wanted to show you our website where you can browse our photographs. If I can share my web screen here.
Yeah, the JPEGs are lossy and the TIFFs are not.
Yes, what that means is, for those that aren't techie, it's loss. It means it won't lose any of its data. By opening and closing photographs on your computer eventually will wear down the or degrade the quality, whereas the TIFF ones do not degrade. So in the background here, you'll see some of the photographs that some of them I used, some of them I didn't. So this is our image website, the Oshawa Public Library's Heritage Collections. To get here, I went to the Oshawa Library website. You can also just search for Oshawa Images Collection and it should pop up. I've categorized some things like buildings of Oshawa, for example, and then you can browse through different pictures of Oshawa. You can bring up, a full screen of the picture. You can, this is how we store, this is how we share them and digitize them. A little bit of information about this particular property. And then we have a location code at the bottom, so I know what box it's in. So it's sort of, we don't just scan them willy-nilly, although early on that kind of did happen. That things were scanned and not numbered properly, and I'm having to kind of keep them, go back and maybe reorganize them. So that's an ongoing project. And then we get new donations occasionally too, which kind of added to my pile. And it's always wonderful that people are willing to share. There's organizations in the city that do collect the history of Oshawa, specifically the Oshawa Museum, which is at the Lakeview Park in the 3 historic houses that are down there. And it's their job to collect the history of Oshawa. I do collect a lot of photographs and books, but most documents I will pass on to them because they are the archive, whereas we're the library. But as a moment, they don't have a lot of space. So some things I'm going to just holding on, and eventually when they get a nice new building, eventually we'll give them a lot of stuff that we feel that is more archival rather than library. But I'm a local history librarian, so I have to have some of these materials to answer questions. So that's
you have the entire Buckley holdings, or
no, the entire Bulkley holdings are held by the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. They were given to, if anyone doesn't know, the Thomas Bulkley was a collector of a photography of local history for many years, and he published 3 books called Pictorial Oshawa, and he gave his photographs to the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. So it's over 4,000 photographs, some of which are in those Pictorial Oshawa books. Some of them are not. And they have a rotating display of them at the gallery. You can also consult the Robert McLaughlin Gallery's picture collection on their website. So if you go to, oops, I'm sorry. If you go to, even if you search for Robert McLaughlin Gallery and then Bulkley, up will come collections, the Robert McLaughlin Gallery. Here we go. Oops. Just to show you what it looks like. And then you can browse that collection. It's taking a moment to load here. This is Thomas Bulkley. And he's the one that collected all the images. So they have something called virtual RMG. Now, RMG just stands for Robert McLaughlin Gallery. Robert McLaughlin, incidentally, was the father of R.S. McLaughlin, and he's the one that formed the original McLaughlin Carriage Factory, which is one of the first photographs I showed. His son and grandson were instrumental in getting this gallery named after, their grandfather and father. So under Explore Collections is where they have a lot of their online collections for the gallery. Now you might think, it's an art gallery. Why do they have photographs? Well, they have a lot of things, but their collection of photographs, the Thomas Bulkley collection, you can not browse, but sort of search for different things. So if I looked for example, what were we talking about? Let me just see here, streets. Let's just look for different street scenes. I can then click on a photograph and see different views of the city from different time periods. And there will be information about the date, description of the photograph sometimes. And you can even, contact them if you have more questions. Now, I use this quite often because they have a lot more photographs than I do on certain areas. So you can explore the photograph collection in this way, because I can only present so many bits. The one that I used earlier, this is where I got it from. The one of Simcoe, Mary Street looking south for the General Motors of Canada North Plant. I got it from this website, and there's information there that the gallery has provided because they got the collection from the Bulkley donation. So by all means, browse. And the Oshawa Museum, if you check out their website, they do have some of their photographs digitized as well in various ways. So it can be a little confusing sometimes. You say, well, why aren't they all in one place? Donors give things different places. So I think the gallery got the photographs, and I think the museum got some documents as well from Bulkley, and we got his book collection because we're a library. So we got his book collection, which was mainly a collection of historical books from Ontario. So anyway, so that concludes my presentation. If no one else has any other questions, I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you next time.